I inherited a remote mountain cabin, while my sister got a $4 million San Diego penthouse. She laughed at me and called it a worthless shack for a filthy drifter. But under the cabin floorboards, I found a secret proving she just made the worst miscalculation of her life. I inherited a cabin while my sister got a San Diego penthouse. When she called me a filthy drifter and told me to stay away, I drove up there alone and froze the moment I stepped inside. The geological survey was sitting right there on the kitchen table at 11:42 p.m. under a kerosene lamp that smelled faintly of cedar and old smoke, and I remember staring at it with hands that wouldn't quite stop trembling, not from fear, from the specific electric shock of realizing that your entire family, the people who had spent an entire afternoon pitying you, had just made the worst miscalculation of their lives. My sister Devo thought she had won. She had walked out of our father's will reading that afternoon with a harbor view penthouse in San Diego worth roughly $4 million and a smug little smile that I wanted to chisel off her face. I had walked out with the keys to a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains that she had publicly described in front of our entire extended family as a place fit for a filthy drifter. She wasn't entirely wrong about the drifter part. 12 years in the army will do that to a man. But she had made one critical error in judgment, the same one she had been making her entire life. She had underestimated me, and the survey on that table prepared by Howard Geological Associates of Asheville, North Carolina, was about to make sure she never forgot it. Let me back up because none of this makes sense without knowing who we are and what this family actually looks like from the inside. My name is Cassian Dawson. I am 37 years old, and for the past 12 years, I served as a logistics officer in the United States Army, most recently stationed at Fort Liberty in North Carolina. I am not the kind of man who raises his voice in public or makes scenes at dinner tables. My ex-commanding officer, Colonel Priya Anand, once told me I had the emotional range of a stone wall during a crisis, and she meant it as the highest possible compliment. My father was Patrick Dawson, founder of Dawson Construction Group, a mid-sized commercial building firm based in Boston that he had grown from a two-man operation in a rented garage into something real and substantial over 40 years. He was a serious man, quiet. He laughed maybe 4 times a year, but when he did, it reached his eyes. He died of a pulmonary embolism in early May, which is the medical establishment's way of saying a blood clot found its way somewhere it absolutely should not have been. And that was that. 68 years old, no warning. 3 weeks of hospital vigil, and then a Tuesday morning phone call I took, standing in a parking lot behind a commissary in full uniform. My sister Dearu is 32 and has never held a job for longer than 14 months. This is not cruel speculation. It is a fact she has announced with pride on multiple occasions, framing it as evidence of her refusal to be confined. She is beautiful in the specific curated way that requires 2 hours of preparation every morning, and she has 340,000 followers on a lifestyle platform where she documents what she calls elevated living. She's been waiting for my father's money since she was approximately 19 years old. I do not say that to be vicious. I say it because in the final year of his life, my father said it to me directly over the phone in a voice that sounded more tired than angry. She's circling, he had told me. Has been for a while. What are you going to do about it? I asked. He paused for a long time. Something she won't expect, he said. I didn't ask him to elaborate. That was the last real conversation we had before the clot. The service was held at St. Edmunds in Back Bay, which is a beautiful church that smells like beeswax and centuries of accumulated guilt. I flew in from Fort Liberty on a Thursday morning wearing my dress uniform because I hadn't had time to pack anything appropriate for a funeral. And also because there's a part of me that refuses to apologize for what I do for a living by hiding the evidence of it. Devo arrived with her photographer. I am not being metaphorical. She brought an actual photographer named Sketch, his professional name I was told, who spent the first 40 minutes of the reception shooting her against various backdrops of tasteful grief. She wore a black dress that cost more than my monthly housing allowance, and she worked the room with the disciplined efficiency of a campaign manager on election night. My mother, Odessa Dawson, sat in the front pew and held my hand during the service, but not during the reception where she followed Diru around the room like a satellite in close orbit. My mother is not a bad woman. She is simply a woman who has spent 35 years choosing the path of least resistance, and Davoo has always been the path of least resistance, because fighting her costs more than surrendering to her. I sat in a corner near the window with a cup of weak tea and waited for Marcus Tibido to arrive. Marcus was my father's attorney of 30 years. Not a flashy man, he drove a 10-year-old Subaru and kept an office in Brooklyn that hadn't been redecorated since approximately 2003. But he was meticulous in the specific way that only lawyers who have seen every variety of family catastrophe can be. He arrived at 3:15 p.m., carrying a battered leather briefcase and wearing an expression I can only describe as professionally mournful. We gathered in the formal dining room myself, Devo Odessa, my uncle Rennick Dawson, who had flown in from Portland, two cousins whose names I can never remember, and Marcus at the head of the table. Dearu sat directly across from me and spent the first 2 minutes arranging herself, as though someone was still taking photographs. Marcus cleared his throat and opened the folder. To my daughter Devo, I leave the luxury penthouse property at 1480 Harbor Point Drive in San Diego, California, along with a 22% minority share in the Dawson Construction Group. Devo made a sound that was almost inaudible, a small private exhale, like a woman confirming a suspicion she had already rehearsed for. She didn't smile broadly. She didn't need to. She just settled back into her chair the way you settle into something you've been waiting to sit down in for a very long time. The penthouse alone was worth somewhere north of $4 million. The construction shares paid quarterly dividends. It was, by any reasonable measure, a spectacular inheritance. Marcus turned the page to my son Cassian. I leave the family cabin and the surrounding 200 acres of land in Harland County in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. Silence, not a quiet silence, the specific charged silence of a room full of people choosing their reactions very carefully. I kept my face neutral. 12 years of briefings in front of generals who were looking for any crack in your composure will train that reflex into your bones permanently. Then Devo laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh exactly. It was worse than that. It was the laugh of someone who has been given a gift they didn't even ask for. And it came with words. A cabin, she said loudly enough that even Rennick looked up from the table. That is genuinely perfect, Cassian. That is absolutely perfect for you. She paused for effect. You've been living out of a duffel bag for 12 years. Now you have an actual duffel bag to live in. Several people found somewhere else to look. You're basically a transient anyway, she continued, and her voice had taken on that particular brightness it gets when she knows she has an audience and feels entirely safe. Dad must have thought so too. He gave the real estate to the one who actually stayed. No offense, she smiled. Full offense. Marcus shifted in his seat. My uncle Rennick cleared his throat. My mother looked at the table with the careful blankness of someone watching a car crash. They believe they cannot stop. I said nothing, not because I had nothing to say. I had approximately 400 things to say, catalogued and ready arranged in order of increasing devastation. But I have learned first from the army, then from just living, that the loudest person in the room is almost never the most dangerous one. I looked at my sister across the table and thought, you have just told me everything I need to know about how this next chapter goes. A filthy drifter in a shack, she added softly, almost to herself, as Marcus began gathering his papers. Honestly, Cassian, at least, now you'll have a real address. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and shook Marcus's hand. Thank you, I told him. Then I walked out of the dining room, picked up my bag from the hallway, and left the house. Deo followed me to the sidewalk, which I should have anticipated. She does not believe in letting a performance end without a finale. Don't be resentful, she called after me. Dad knew what he was doing. You were always somewhere else. I was the one who was actually here. I turned around. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because the instinct is to tell you I was cool and controlled and above it all. I was not entirely above it all. There was a flash of something hot and specific behind my sternum. Not rage exactly, but the particular focused anger of a man who has been patient for a very long time, with people who interpret his patience as weakness. You weren't here for him. I said, you were here for this. There's a difference. And he knew the difference. Her face changed. The performance dropped for just a second. A flicker of something real beneath it, that looked almost like fear. Then it closed back over. Enjoy your shack, she said. I got in my car. My mother came to my apartment the next morning without calling first, which is a specific kind of ambush that I have been navigating since childhood. She was dressed as though she were going to a committee lunch pearls, and all which is how I knew she was anxious. Odessa Dawson puts on armor when she feels uncertain. She sat at my kitchen table and told me that Devo felt terrible about what she had said and wanted to discuss the property. What is there to discuss? I asked. She thinks the cabin might be better managed as a collective family asset, my mother said carefully. She knows people in commercial real estate who could. She wants it, I said. My mother was quiet. She spent all of yesterday telling a room full of people that Dad gave me a shack worth nothing. And now she wants it, I said. What changed between yesterday and today? Odessa looked at her hands. She thinks there may be development potential in the acreage. She's prepared to offer you a very fair buyout. She mentioned $500,000, which given what it would cost to maintain such a number. I said Cassian number. Tell her the answer is no. And if she wants to have a real conversation about it, she can come find me on the property. My mother looked at me for a long moment, with an expression I recognized from childhood, a kind of exhausted, helpless love that never quite translated into action. Then she picked up her bag and left. I spent 3 days putting my affairs in order and loading my truck. I had 4 weeks of leave accumulated. I took all of it. The drive into the Blue Ridge took 7 hours, the last 2 of which involved roads that became progressively narrower and more serious about keeping casual visitors away. The temperature dropped 6 degrees as I gained elevation, and by the time I turned onto the private dirt track that Marcus had marked on the property map, it was nearly dark. My headlights found the cabin at 8:14 p.m. I sat in the truck for a moment, with the engine running, and looked at it. It was not what I had imagined when Devo said shack. It was small, 1-story, weathered pine siding, gone silver with age, a stone chimney at the east end, but it had the particular solidity of a thing built by someone who actually understood load and stress in the long game of weather. The porch ran the full width of the front. Old iron lanterns flanked the door. I went inside expecting damp rot, the smell of a neglected place. Instead, the air was clean and carried the faint ghost of wood smoke and dried herbs. Someone had been maintaining this cabin regularly. The wood floors were swept. The stone fireplace was clean. There were split logs stacked by the hearth. I turned on the lamp on the side table and found above the mantel a framed photograph I had never seen before. My father, young, maybe 25, standing in front of what looked like the same hillside visible through the cabin's back window. Beside him was a woman I had never seen in any family photograph ever. She was maybe 50 in the picture, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, smiling at the camera with the confidence of someone who owned the ground she was standing on. On the back of the frame, written in my father's handwriting with Rose 1987, where it started. I was still staring at it when someone knocked on the door. My hand went to my hip before my brain caught up. 12 years of that particular instinct don't just switch off. And then I remembered I wasn't carrying. Open the door and found an old man standing on the porch with a thermos. "You're Cassian," he said. Not a question. "Yes, Wendell Okafor. I live about half a mile down the ridge." He held up the thermos. "Your father told me you'd come eventually, and that you'd probably arrive late and look like you needed coffee." He was right on both counts. Wendell was 71 years old, a retired Marine Master Sergeant who had done 3 tours in Vietnam and 1 in Lebanon before settling in these mountains in 1987, the same year I would later learn as the photograph on the mantel. He had the upright posture and the careful eyes of a man who has been in enough situations where reading your surroundings accurately was the difference between alive and not. We recognized each other immediately in the way that service people do. He sat at the kitchen table and poured 2 cups and told me that my father had been coming to this property every month for 31 years. "Every month," I said, "sometimes more. He had a whole other life up here, son. Not secret exactly, just private. He said Boston took too much out of him." Wendell looked at me steadily. "He talked about you a lot, not your sister. He let that land without embellishment. Then he told me about the floorboard. He said there'd be something under the kitchen floor for you," Wendell said. "Third plank from the left near the stove. He put it there himself about 2 years ago. I found it in 4 minutes. The plank shifted when I pressed it and lifted cleanly. Beneath it was a sealed metal document box wrapped in oilcloth. The kind of moisture-resistant packing you use when you need something to survive decades if necessary." I carried it to the table and opened it. Inside, a letter in my father's handwriting, 6 pages long, a stack of property documents, 3 photographs. I had never seen a trust amendment dated 14 months ago, and at the bottom of the stack, wrapped in its own sleeve, a geological survey document bearing the seal of Howard Geological Associates, Asheville, North Carolina, commissioned privately and completed 18 months before my father's death. I unfolded the survey. I read it. I set it down. I picked it up and read it again. The 200 acres were sitting on top of confirmed deposits of lithium spamine and high-purity industrial quartz, the specific materials that are currently in critical level global demand for battery manufacturing and semiconductor production. The estimated extractable value of the mineral rights, even under conservative modeling, was between $60 and $90 million. A separate note clipped to the survey in my father's handwriting referenced 2 preliminary acquisition expressions of interest from technology companies that he had declined to pursue without my involvement. He had known for a year and a half. He had told nobody. He had wrapped it in oilcloth and put it under the floor and waited for me. I sat at the kitchen table in that small, clean, carefully maintained cabin for a long time. Wendell had gone home. The fire I'd started was burning down to orange coals. Outside, the mountains were making the specific nighttime sounds that mountains make when there are no cities anywhere near them. Wind in the canopy, something moving in the brush, the distant percussion of a creek running over rocks. My father's letter was 6 pages. I am not going to reproduce all of it here. Some of it is private in a way I intend to keep private, but the relevant part, the part that explained Rose in the photograph and why he had chosen to structure things the way he had, was this. Rose Atherwood had been a conservation attorney and the previous owner of this land. She had sold it to my father in 1987 at below market value on one condition: that it never be developed for profit alone, but used for something that lasted. She had spent 40 years protecting these mountains legally before her death in 2001, and she had recognized in my father, he wrote, the same instinct for something durable over something flashy. They had been close friends, mentors to each other in different ways. "I could have sold the mineral rights years ago," he wrote. "I had offers. I didn't, because Rose taught me to ask what lasts. Money spent is gone. Something built for people remains. I know you know the difference, Cassian. I don't know that your sister does. That's not cruelty. It's just an honest assessment. He wanted me to use the resources to build a retreat for veterans, a real one. Not a glossy brochure operation, but a working place with land and quiet, and the specific dignity of being left alone to heal at your own pace in your own time. He had already spoken with the State Conservation Office about a protective land trust. He had already identified an environmental law firm in Asheville. You are not getting the lesser inheritance, he wrote near the end. I need you to understand that I gave Devo what she wanted. I gave you what you need to do something that matters. I trust you with this, because you are the only one I'm certain won't simply cash out and call it a life. I hope I'm right. I believe I am. I love you, son. I'm sorry I wasn't better at showing it when I had time. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the box. Then I went out onto the porch and stood in the dark for a while. The black SUV appeared at 7:40 the next morning. I was on the porch with my coffee when it came up the dirt road, a late model Escalade Tennessee plates, and parked 30 feet from the cabin. Two men in business casual clothing got out, one carrying a clipboard, and immediately began walking the tree line at the edge of the clearing, pointing at the ridgeline and taking photographs with a professional camera. I walked to the edge of the porch. This is private property, I said. You have about 30 seconds to explain who you are and who sent you. The taller one turned around with a practiced smile. Mr. Dawson, apologies for the early arrival. We're from Crestline Property Partners. Your sister retained us to conduct a preliminary assessment of the acreage, for my sister doesn't own this acreage. I said she has no legal relationship to this property in any form. You're trespassing. She indicated there was a family conversation ongoing about the disposition of there isn't. I said, leave now or I call the sheriff's department and we have a different kind of conversation. They left. I called Marcus Tobido at 8:05 a.m. He answered on the second ring. When I told him about the SUV, he went quiet for a moment in the specific way of a man choosing his words carefully. She's retained Howard and Pierce, he said finally. They specialize in will contests and asset recovery litigation. They filed a preliminary inquiry with the probate court 3 days ago. On what grounds? They're claiming your father lacked testamentary capacity at the time of signing due to the medication protocols from his cardiac treatment. Marcus's voice was measured. It's a standard pressure tactic. The will is airtight. He was examined by Dr. Fenwick Osei, a board-certified neurologist at Mass General, who documented his cognitive status specifically because your father anticipated a challenge. We have the report. We have the video examination your father requested be recorded. We have everything we need. How long does a challenge take with their firm? 6 to 18 months if they push it. But Cassian, he paused. She doesn't know about the survey, does she? No. Keep it that way. Don't file anything with the mineral rights until the will contest is resolved. Once that's settled, we move fast. Understood. I spent the next 2 weeks working alongside Wendell to secure the property and understand it. We walked the full perimeter of the 200 acres over 3 days, and he showed me the creek that ran the property's eastern edge, the old logging roads that had grown over in the decades since my father stopped using them. The eastern meadow where my father had apparently spent hours sitting and doing nothing in particular. Did he seem happy up here? I asked Wendell one evening. Wendell thought about it seriously. He seemed like himself up here, he said finally. Whatever that was when no one was asking anything from him. Devo called on a Thursday. I need you to stop being dramatic about this, she said, which is how she opens every conversation she feels entitled to win. I know about the challenge. Marcus is going to lose this. Dad was on serious medication toward the end, and anyone reasonable can see that leaving you a mountain cabin instead of an equitable share of the estate is not a decision a man in full cognitive capacity makes. He also left you $4 million in real estate and a stake in the company. I said, that's not the point. What is the point? Devo. She shifted tactics. Look, I'll drop the challenge entirely, and we move on like adults. If you agree to a buyout, I'll go to 600,000. That's more than fair for that acreage. 600,000 for 60 to 90 million in mineral rights, and 200 acres of protected bluage land. No, I said you are being so. The answer is no. I said it will remain no. If you'd like to visit and talk in person, you're welcome to come up, but bring your own coffee. She did come up 4 days later with my mother in tow, because Devo does not go anywhere she considers hostile territory without a witness she can manage. She stepped out of a rented Range Rover and heeled ankle boots that were immediately wrong for the terrain, looked at the cabin and said, "God, Cassian, you're actually living here." "Yes," I said, like full-time at the moment. She walked up onto the porch without being invited and went inside, which is a Deru habit I had forgotten about, the assumption that all spaces are open to her. She moved through the living room with her arms crossed, and her eyes cataloguing everything with the focused efficiency of someone running an appraisal. She noticed the pulled-up floorboard immediately. I had covered it with a piece of rug, but not quite adequately. "What's under there?" she asked. "Nothing useful to you," I said. Her eyes went to the mantel to the photograph of my father and Rose. "Who is that woman?" she asked. "A friend of Dad's." "I've never seen her before." "No," I said. "You wouldn't have." Odessa sat on the sofa and looked at me with the expression she reserves for situations where she knows she is responsible for something and cannot figure out how to say so. "We just want what's fair," she said quietly. "I know," I said, and I meant it. I don't think my mother is a malicious woman. I think she is a woman who made a hierarchy in her heart a long time ago and has been living inside its consequences ever since. Devo pulled a document from her bag, a formal buyout offer prepared by Howard & Pierce for $650,000 with a liability waiver and a non-disclosure clause. She held it out to me. "Sign this, and we're done." She said, "You get money. I get the headache of managing this land, and we go back to being family." I looked at the document. I looked at my sister. "We were never quite family in the way you're describing." I said, "But thank you for driving up." Up. She left the document on the kitchen table. I left it there while I walked them to the car. As they were backing out, Devo rolled down the window. "You're going to regret this when the challenge wins and you get nothing," she said. I raised my coffee mug. Dr. Fenwick Oy's testimony was the ball game. He was a board-certified neurologist with 22 years at Mass General and had examined my father at my father's specific and documented request 8 months before his death. The examination had been thorough recorded in full HD on a tablet at my father's insistence, and the written report ran to 19 pages. Dr. OA had also, it emerged during deposition, kept contemporaneous notes about my father's stated reasons for the examination. He told me he was restructuring his estate in a way he expected would be contested, Dr. OA said in deposition, as documented in the filing submitted by Marcus Thibodeau in the probate matter of Dawson Estate, docket 24, PR 7741. He wanted documentation that he was of sound mind and understood exactly what he was doing and why. He was one of the clearest patients I have examined in my career. The challenge was dismissed with prejudice 6 weeks after it was filed. Howard & Pierce withdrew from the matter 2 days after the dismissal. I later learned from a contact at the Boston Bar Association who knew Marcus that they had been given a fairly comprehensive briefing on the strength of Dr. OA's documentation before they withdrew. They were pragmatic people. Dearu did not call me after the dismissal. She did not call me for 3 months. In that time, Marcus and I filed the mineral rights under the existing protective trust framework my father had established. We engaged Howlin Geological Associates for a formal commercial survey and entered into preliminary discussions with 2 technology companies, one domestic, one international, who had been quietly circling the region's lithium deposits for years. We also retained the services of Marisol Pacheco Vance, an environmental attorney based in Asheville, with 15 years of specialized conservation practice, who spent 6 weeks with me, walking the property and designing a mining access framework that would extract the lithium responsibly over a 25-year horizon without compromising the surface ecology of the land. You could make more faster if you allowed surface mining, she told me during one of our walks. I know, I said. She looked at me. But you're not going to. My father asked me to build something that lasts. I said, that's what I'm going to do. We named the foundation the Patrick and Rose Foundation, after my father and the woman in the photograph on the mantel. Its mission was a working veterans retreat on the Blue Ridge property. Not a facility, not a program, just land and quiet, and people trained to understand what comes home from wars inside the men and women who fight them. Wendell agreed to serve as director of operations, which he accepted with a formality that told me it meant a great deal to him. The first phase of the foundation was funded through an initial licensing agreement with one of the technology companies, a royalty structure on the lithium extraction that generated in its first quarter of operation more money than Davu's buyout offer by a factor of 12. She found out about the mineral rights through a mutual contact in the Boston real estate world. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon in October. There was a long pause after I answered. How long did you know, she asked. I found the survey the first night I was here, I said. Dad left it under the floorboard with his letter. Another pause longer. He planned all of this, she said. Not a question. Yes, I said. He planned all of it. I heard her breathing on the other end of the line. Somewhere in that breathing was the specific sound a person makes when they replay a series of decisions and understand for the first time exactly where they went wrong. Cassie. I know, I said. I'm not interested in a war, Devo. I'm not going to take anything from you. The penthouse is yours. The shares are yours. I wish you well with them. But this land is mine, and what we're building here is mine, and that's not going to change. She hung up before I could say anything else. That was fine. I had said what needed to be said. The grand opening of the Foundation's first retreat buildings happened on a Saturday in early November, on a morning so clear and cold that the mountains looked like they had been cut from blue glass. We had 43 veterans in attendance, most of them referred through the VA network that Marisol had spent 2 months connecting us to. Wendell gave a short address that was better than anything I could have written. My mother came. She stood at the back of the gathering in her good coat and did not say much. After the ceremony, she found me on the porch and stood beside me for a moment, looking out at the trees. Your father would have... She started. I know, I said before she could finish. She put her hand on my arm briefly. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then she walked back toward the parking area, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. It wasn't an apology. It was something smaller and more honest than an apology, an acknowledgement maybe, or just the particular kind of silence that contains everything a person means and cannot find the language for. I let it be enough. 3 months later, I officially separated from the Army. My commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Whitfield, shook my hand at the ceremony and told me that what I was doing with the Foundation was the kind of transition the Army always talks about preparing people for and almost never actually does. I live in the cabin full-time now. I have replaced a few of the porch boards. I have learned that the creek runs highest in April. I have learned that the eastern meadow where my father used to sit and do nothing catches light in the late afternoon in a way that is genuinely difficult to describe to someone who hasn't seen it. Davu has 390,000 followers now. She posted about the San Diego penthouse last spring with the caption, "Living the life I was always meant for," and it got 400,000 likes. I am genuinely glad she has something that makes her happy. The photo of my father and Rose still sits on the mantel. The name of the foundation is carved into a wooden sign at the base of the drive, And every morning when I walk down to check the gate, I see it, the Patrick and Rose Foundation where it started. My father left the stinking shack to the one person he trusted to understand that what sits in the ground beneath it, and what could be built on top of it, was worth more than everything he gave his other daughter put together. He wasn't wrong. He was never wrong about the things that mattered.